Hey there, everyone. Today we're going to talk about some of the layout tools and hand tools you'll be using in Shop. I want you to pay close attention to what we're going over because we will be taking our safety tests, which you have several safety tests, and general knowledge tests the last day before Thanksgiving break. So that would be Tuesday of that week. And then when we get back from Thanksgiving break, we will be diving into Shop. So you'll be coming out and starting to do your first cuts for projects. If you're going to bring your own materials in for your project, you need to have those here by that first day that we are back, which would actually be the Wednesday after Thanksgiving break, because we do not have school that Monday. So I'll put a reminder out and explain that in class as well, but be thinking about that now. If you want to bring in your lumber before the Thanksgiving break, you can do that as well. Just let me know and I'll show you where to put that. So the first thing we have to remember is our safety guidelines as to what to wear in Shop. I may not be operating tools, but I'm going to demonstrate safety today. So I have put my hair back in a ponytail, keep it out of my face. I'm not wearing any jewelry or sleeves that hang down. I am also making sure to wear my safety glasses. I just thought of one thing for me that gets in the way, and that's this bad boy right here. So if I'm in the wood shop, I'm going to put that in my pocket or in a spot where it's not going to get caught on something. I'd really hate for that to be the reason why I'm not here the next day. So we're going to start with some layout tools. Layout tools means that you're going to be marking your project and laying it out. First and foremost, whenever you're marking lumber, sometimes I have students that they want to grab a marker and mark on it. Well, the problem whenever you use a marker on lumber is it bleeds. So that line is going to be thicker than what I most likely wanted. If I'm using a pencil, that mark is going to be thinner, it's not going to bleed, and it's going to be more precise. Not only that, but whenever I get to the finishing side of my project, sanding this line out is a lot harder than sanding my pencil line out. And depending on what you're making, if it's like one of the flower beds out that we're going to put outside, not as big a deal if it has the marks on it, though it is a little less eye appealing if it's on the outside. But if you were making something like a washer's box or a candle holder or something to that effect, cornhole game, and you wanted to put a finish on it that looks nice, that's going to deter from that because it's going to take a lot of sanding to get that out, and it's just not desirable. Then we look at some of the tools. So this is an example of a carpenter square. So a carpenter square, you can see it is square. We use a carpenter square to lay out a lot of things, including you can lay out stairs and rafters with this. For our purposes, for our shop classy or small projects, this works great as a straight edge, and it also can be used as a measurement tool. It has a ruler pretty much right across the top here, and also a ruler towards the inside. It is important that you measure and that you measure precisely. That's why we've been doing the measurement lessons. If we just come in and we say, oh, it's about a quarter inch and being a quarter inch can be a lot of a difference. Your about and my about might be different. And if I'm trying to put something precise together, like make a box, my box might start to look a little off square if I don't take and measure it out precisely. The other thing you can do with a square is I can actually see, is it square? So I can take it up to an item, put this up in the corner and see, did I attach it squarely? If I'm trying to make a washer's box or a cornhole game where the edges are going to be square, I need to make sure that even if it's cut straight, that they match up. And so that's where some of the things I'll ask you, did you use a square? To use it, just put it up there in that corner. If I had another board coming down the other side, I can go on the inside, or I could go on the outside of that project and see if it is laying square, and it should match up along my board or along the carpenter square. This is also a problem if you're making a shelf or something, maybe a bookcase, and then it's off kilter and all your books fall to one side or stuff rolls off of it. All right, so this is a carpenter square. They don't all have to be yellow. A lot of them are just the color of metal. They are painted. Okay, set that one aside. Here we have a combination square. A combination square does a few different things, hence the name combination. So again, this one's hard to see from a distance, but it has a rule across here, so you can also measure with it. It works great as a straight edge. It does create a square. It's a lot smaller, so you're going to be more precise, but I can still, even if I have a large project, I can see if it's square really closely. The other bonus that this has, and I'll bring this a little closer to you, this has a bubble on it. So it's got a level. And the level is going to tell you, as you put that to see if it's square, does it actually level out? And also, it being combination, you can move this to wherever you want it on there. That helps to mark distance. You can also see if angles are fitting in. So combination square. The third type of square that you might use in our shop, and this one you'll probably use more often than the others as a straight edge, is the tri-square. And tri-square, this is a stationary piece with no measurement, no rule on it, but across the top it does have a rule. One of the things that I'm going to ask you to use this for on the daily regular occurrence is when I make my measurement to cut a piece of wood, I want to make sure that my line is marked. So if you take this, the beauty of this tri-square is when you pull it up against here, it stops and it holds it in place. Then I can draw my straight line, and I have ensured that I'm going to be cutting a straight line. Okay, so that's your 3 squares. All right, next up, we're going to look at the handsaw. So those were layout tools. I have one other layout tool I'm going to have to go grab. Let me come right back. All right, so I have a level. Levels, you can get smaller ones. This is it's pretty standard size for what we use in our shop because we have a lot of larger projects. But this level has 3 different spots where it has a bubble. And you are going to be looking to, if you're leveling something flat like this, you would lay it across and watch for the bubble to match between the 2 lines. And I'll come closer here in just a minute to show you. If, let's say I wanted to say a wall or something that was long, vertically was level, I could set this up against it like this, butt it up against the edge of that wall or that project, and determine if it is level by looking at this bubble. This one is for an angle, so depending on how you wanted to set it, to understand if it is level this direction. Real quick to show you what I mean by if it is level. As you can see the bubbles here. To make it level, we want this bubble that's floating around by my fingertip here to match right between those black 2 lines. And if it is dead center, then we are good to go, which it is almost the size of the space between those 2 lines. So it's pretty good to figure that part out. But that's something you need to check periodically on your project if it's something that the levelness of it is going to be a problem. Do not wait until the end, because if you wait till the end, you're probably going to have to disassemble and then reassemble, and then you're going to have holes in your project that you have to go back and patch. And it's just time, money, and effort that you are hurting there. And it may even, in the end, depending like if you're staining or if you're painting, it may actually take down the quality of your project. Okay, so that's the last layout tool that we're going to be looking at, because in our shop, that's mostly what you're going to be using. There's a lot of others out there. And if there's something that we decide you might need, we'll go over that just you and me independently and make sure you're ready to go. So let's look at some of these other tools I have on the table. Now, whenever we took our pre-test, a lot of people were like, it's a hammer. I know that. Well, there's lots of different styles of hammers, and they have different uses. This is a claw hammer. We have ball peen hammer that I have here. Ball peen is not something that you'll probably be using in shop unless you just, everyone has one of those out and there's not available. But ball peen means it has a ball on one side and it has the peen or the flat side on the other. We use this a lot in our wood shop or our metal shop activities when we're working with different metal projects. But for us, we're going to be focusing on our claw hammer. Now, as I mentioned in class, I may be going kind of basic here, but I want to make sure everyone's on the same page because we've not been on that page before. So first of all, where do you hold the hammer? Well, the hammer, a lot of them have a cheat on them. When you look at where the rubber grip is, you're going to hold the hammer down towards the bottom. If it's a full wooden handle, it doesn't have that cheat on it, but you still should know you hold it down at the bottom. If I try to hold the hammer up here, there's a couple problems. First of all, I'm going to, as I hammer and I make small movements, it's coming back and it's hitting me. You're going to have a nice sore spot there, if not bruise. Also, I have to work a lot harder. If I'm going to be hammering, holding the top of the hammer head, I have to put all the force into that. And I can feel that weight. Hammers are balanced. And you can get them for different weights and different pounds. There's a couple that my dad, who's a carpenter my entire life, he has that I can hardly use. Like I can't swing them, and there's a few that he could barely swing as well. And the reason that they are weighted that way is so that they do the work. You don't want to wear out by holding it up here. As I kind of swing it, I can feel that it's pulling this weight up here of the head is pulling my arm down. Well, I'm going to let that hammer do the work for me. So when I hammer and use it, I'm going to hold down at the bottom. That way, when I make my swing, the force of that hammerhead and the weight and balance is going to pull down. And I have to work about half as much, if even that, to drive that hammer or drive that nail in. Okay, so you're going to hold down here. It's also not a two-handed job. For one thing, that so often brings it back where I've seen kids hit themselves in the face simply because now it's more centered to your body and not to the side, because you want to hammer to the side. It's a one-arm job. That way you get full range of motion. Okay, if you're a left-hander, you can still do it left-handed. That's the beauty of hammer. There's not a left-handed and a right-handed hammer. It works both ways. The second thing I want to address is how to remove a nail. And you might giggle and laugh. I know some of you rolled your eyes when I mentioned it in class, but if you haven't used the hammer very often, you may not be aware of how to do that. The claw on the claw hammer is where you're going to put that. And of course, I didn't bring a nail up here. You would put the head of the nail into that. If it was in this board, I'm then going to slide this under the head of the nail, and I'm going to rock backwards. And that, again, you're using the hammer to do the job. You're going to pull it out. If it's not coming out very well, do short little jerks, and it should go ahead and work its way out. We'll talk a little bit later when we talk about fasteners of some ways that you can get nails to better fasten, or if it's a very hard piece of lumber, how to get them to drive the nail into that board. Sometimes we have to do a little pilot hole drilling, which we do in screws all the time, and we don't always think about with nails. We can also use some other lubricants as well. So that's the hammer. Okay, we're going to go to another pretty basic tool that we've probably all used at some point in our life. It may have not been to assemble a project, but probably to do something, remove a screw or put one in. So there are multiple types of tips of both screwdrivers and drills, and we'll talk about drills as well. But the two standard, which like every good shop would have in it, is a straight, or some would call it flathead screwdriver, and we have a Phillips head, which is that kind of star bit or the plus sign if I were to make a print of this down. Things to know about your screwdrivers as well as your drills. There are different size screwdrivers. Make sure you're using the right one. If you're using the wrong one, you could either damage the actual screwdriver and or damage the screw. If your screw gets damaged and it is stripped, then you can't back it out of the wood, and that's a problem. If you are using the right size, it's going to get a good grip in there and go ahead and turn it. Also, the thing that, and I'm guilty of it, of this as well, but the thing about screwdrivers is they are meant for taking a force that's turning. That's the way they are supposed to take the resistance. Using a screwdriver as a prying mechanism, like taking paint can lids off, things of that nature, that is not what they're made for, and they're not rated to do this. So that's actually a really good way to bend or break your screwdriver. And it may not seem like a big deal. Oh, I broke this little screwdriver, but depending on how much force you're putting on it, it could actually, if it broke and then ricochet, it could impale you or injure you in some way, especially if you're not wearing safety glasses or something to that effect. So make sure that these are not used as prying tools, that they're used to tighten and loosen hardware. Next up, we have a couple different pliers. If you're using bolts, you might need a pliers set to help hold. We've got some others around here in shop. These were just the ones that I wrangled right now. With Mr. Bergen's classes being out in shop, it's a little harder sometimes to find stuff because they're actively using them. So we have channel locks. They have a channel that slides back and forth. And once you turn it, there's a little groove basically in this side. And there is a piece that stands out, and they lock in at that point, so they won't slide. Then we have vice grips. Vice grips are adjustable, and when they tighten down, they'll lock in place, and then you can push up here, and it'll go ahead and loosen. So we have these out in shop. Usually these are going to be, sorry about that, more with bolts than anything. We also have some crescent wrenches. I just didn't drag one of those over here, but we've got several different tools that you might be using if you're using bolts. Next up, we have just a couple more things to look at today, and that is a handsaw. Now, there are different types of handsaws. I know on our pre-quiz, a lot of you just said handsaw, handsaw, handsaw. Well, there are different names for what they do. There's a box saw, which is very square. We have coping saws. We have just all kinds of different things. The one that I'm holding in my hand is a crosscut saw, and it is called a crosscut saw because if you look at it, and it's very hard to see whenever it's on screen here, but if you look at this, the teeth, which are these right here, are set every other way. So one's bent this way, one's bent this way. If you've ever heard of somebody getting a saw sharpened or a blade sharpened, even for a machine that an electric saw, it is going to have its teeth set if it has teeth like this. And so they actually would set one this way and one the opposite way. The more teeth there are per inch tells you how fine of a cut it is or how coarse of a cut. So the lower the number, they basically within an inch, how many teeth are in there, that's going to be a more coarse cut. Now, saws, you might say, well, this is easy. Everybody can use a handsaw. I would not assume that. I have had a little bit of experience with this, and there are a lot of people that work a lot harder than the saw does. We don't want to work harder than the saw. We want it to work for us. So the first thing, I'm 5'5" and 1/2 inch. This table is not going to be good for me to saw on. With this saw, you want to have an angle. This is not an ideal angle for me to saw. Okay, you want to get this piece of lumber at a lower level for you, whatever's comfortable with you. If you're tall, like this table would even, for somebody 6 foot, is going to be a little hard to saw on. Not that you would probably saw on the table, but on the side of the table. You want the saw, and it's a little hard to show you here, but you want the saw to be at a good angle. Like I said, for me, comfortably would be more down this height. All right? You want it to be at an angle, and our saws are flexible, right? So you do not want to jam into the board on your way down, because what's going to happen? Well, you're going to wiggle back and forth. So when you go down, you're not focused on cutting, you're focused on moving it down. When you come back up through that board, that is when you're making your cuts. So that's when you're going to put your pressure into the board. And again, you don't want to jam it, okay? A good rule of thumb too, if you have a long piece of lumber that you are cutting, and as you start cutting through it, you get like 3/4 of the way or a little more through it, and it starts to bind the blade. So it's going to be harder to go through if that board is not sitting flat on the other side, which is important. You should use a sawhorse if you have that available, or something else, even someone to hold it. But binding the blade, if it's pushing on that blade and kind of pinching it, it's going to make it so you can't cut very well. So a good idea is, if that's the case, flip it over and cut from the opposite way. Just make sure that your two lines are going to hit together. Okay, so we probably won't have to use this very much because we do have power tools and you are learning about them. But I want you to know how to use one of these, because sometimes it's just easier. It works the same as if you're talking about a hacksaw or coping saw or whatever it may be whenever you're making these cuts. Just keep those rules of thumb in mind. A couple other just real quick tools. We're going to talk more about finishing later, but of course we have good old sandpaper. The finer the grit of sandpaper, the more it's used for finishing. So your first sanding, whenever you're doing a project and you're taking that first coat off, you're going to do something a little heavier grit. This is pretty fine grit. It's 220. This is a finishing sandpaper. So this is what I'm going to do, either the very last sanding coat before I put any finish on it, or like if I'm putting clear coat on and I'm going to sand between clear coats, then I'm going to use something like a 220 grit that's not actually going to get down into that dry clear coat of the first layer, but it's going to take off any of the little bit of raised particles that clear coat will cause. Okay, also we have a few holding tools. Well, there are many more out there too that you will probably be using the most. And there's actually 3. I'll go grab one more here in a second. We have a C-clamp. A C-clamp is pretty easy. If I say, hey, go grab a C-clamp, this one you should be able to pull out pretty quick because, well, it's shaped like a C, right? So it's pretty easy to find. They're all hanging up in there, but you just put this on your board, this underneath the table or whatever it may be, twist, and it'll tighten into the table. One thing you need to be very careful about And especially because these, we use them with metal, that sometimes they are dirty. So if you're putting it on your nice pine board or whatever, your nice clean board, you might need to wipe them down a little bit. The other thing to be careful of is when you put this on here and you start cranking on to tighten this down, well, if it's one that's got a ball like this, it's going to put a divot, a dent in your board. If you are cranking down super tight, it may divot on the top as well. So in that case, we need to find a piece of scrap board, something to be a buffer that you can put between the top of this and the bottom, or if you just need the bottom, so that if it pushes down and it makes an indentation on the board, that's going to be scrap that you throw out. Don't damage your good board on your project simply because you're hammering down on this really tight because you want it not to move. Well, that's great. We don't want it to move. We also don't want to damage our product. We also have clamps like this. We have several back in the tool room, and I'm going to show you the tool room here later. But this is one, if you were gluing boards, works really well. I had two boards together, and I was going to glue them. And I take and you pull this right up, and then you tighten it by screwing in the handle. Same thing. You don't want, especially on this end where it's smaller, you don't want to divot your boards and damage them. So make sure, again, you're putting a buffer board in. Let me go grab that last clamp and show you real quick. This is a wood clamp, and it is also going to be used if you need to clamp something together, especially if you're gluing something. The way this one works is both of these turn, and instead of sitting here trying to straighten them up and turn like this, if you take and hold them and they're going to go opposite or together, you can do this to get them together or apart. If you're wanting to type in and put pressure down, you're going to make this part farther away. Otherwise, you should always start where they're even. So I would want to make sure that these matched up before I started twisting so I can see where it fits on my board. These don't usually leave much of an indentation because they are flat and it's wood anyway, so it's not going to put as much pressure. One other that I just saw when I was in the tool room there is this tool right here. And this is a hand planer. We kind of talked about this a little bit in our pre-work. And we talked about that Mr. Scott has a planer, electric planers in his classroom or shop. To use the hand planer, it's just taken smooth off. If you have something maybe where you glued it and there's a little bit of a ridge, or you want to smooth it and shape wood. If I wanted to make curvatures to it, you can take and shave different parts of it off if it's a solid, large piece. So to use this, you're going to hold on to the ball handle. You're going to hold on to the handle back here, and you simply scrape across this board. Of course, I would have this clamped down, so this one's not working very well. It has a blade right here. There's actually a little wood cut in there that is going to take off that thin of a layer. And this is actually adjustable. You can take and use a screwdriver there, and you can raise or lower this depending on how much you want to take off. Usually, you're just taking off a nice thin layer. So that's everything on the hand tools that we'll be using. Oh, I take that back. One more here. We do have some rasp and some files, and we have lots of these in the tool room. A rasp is going to have a little bit more bite to it. If you needed to, maybe we cut a hole, we need to get that so it's more even. A rasp will take more off as you go across that. And a rasp you would put against the board. It's usually round on one side and flat on the other. We have a few that are different. And you're going to drag it across the wood. You can feel on the rasp. This one, as I come up this way, it's got some sharpness to it. As I go this way, it's not as much. So on the downward motion, you would have that cutting action. On a file, same thing. Think about like a fingernail file. It works essentially the same way. We have round files, flat files. We have some that are like this that are crescent shaped. So that would be, again, taking off more of an edge, more than maybe what sandpaper would. Okay, that is all of our hand tools that we're going to go over for today. Make sure that if you have any questions, you ask them, especially when we get out to shop. Have a fantastic day, and I can't wait to see you soon.